The air felt heavier lately, thick with unspoken words and unanswered questions. It started subtly, like the faint hum of static in the background of our lives. My wife, Laura, had always been a vibrant presence, her laugh infectious, her smile disarming. But in the past few months, her energy had shifted. She was quieter, more distant, as though some invisible weight tethered her to a realm I couldn't reach. At first, I dismissed it as the natural stresses of pregnancy. The baby, after all, was a life-changing event for both of us. I had tried to be supportive in every way I could, attending every appointment, reading every book, and even assembling a nursery in record time. But something about her behavior gnawed at me, an unease I couldn't quite name. It wasn't just the distance. It was the glances at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, the muted smiles that didn't quite reach her eyes, the sudden excuses to stay late at work. Was I overthinking this? I asked myself more times than I could count. Was this paranoia, or was something more insidious at play? One evening, as we sat together in the living room, I noticed how her fingers lingered over her phone, tracing its edges absent-mindedly. She caught me watching and offered a tight-lipped smile. "Work's been hectic," she said, her voice casual but her tone rehearsed. "I'm just trying to keep everything on track before maternity leave." I nodded, masking my skepticism. "I get that. If you ever need help with anything, just let me know." Her smile wavered for a fraction of a second, and she nodded. "Thanks." The conversation ended there, but my mind kept replaying her words. They felt hollow, like a script she'd memorized. My gut told me something wasn't right, but I couldn't bring myself to confront her outright, not without proof, not without certainty. The first crack in the facade came a week later. Laura had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she stepped into the shower. I wasn't proud of it, but curiosity and a creeping sense of dread got the better of me. I unlocked her phone using the passcode I'd seen her enter 100 times before and scanned her messages. Most of the conversations were ordinary, mundane even, but one thread stood out, a name I didn't recognize, Ryan. The texts weren't overtly incriminating, but they were off. Their tone was playful, flirtatious in a way that didn't sit right with me. Ryan: "You're glowing these days. Pregnancy suits you." Laura: "Ha ha ha, thanks. You're sweet." Ryan: "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Lunch break? Same spot?" Laura: "You know it." My chest tightened. The messages weren't damning, but they raised enough questions to send my mind spiraling. Who was Ryan? A coworker, clearly. But what kind of coworker? And why did their exchanges carry this undercurrent of intimacy? That night, as Laura slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind a storm of conflicting emotions. Anger, hurt, doubt. They churned inside me, leaving me restless and hollow. Was I imagining things? Or was this the beginning of something I didn't want to face? I resolved to find out the truth. Whatever it took, I needed answers. Not just for my sake, but for the life growing inside Laura. If there was betrayal, I had to know. And if there wasn't, I needed to lay this paranoia to rest. The next morning, I took the first step. I hired a private investigator. It felt extreme, invasive even, but the stakes were too high. I needed clarity, and I wasn't sure I could get it on my own. Days turned into weeks, and the investigator's updates were a mixture of frustration and anticipation. Laura's routine seemed normal enough: work, errands, doctor appointments. But then came the photos. The first showed her at a cafe, seated across from a man who could only be Ryan. He was tall, with a lean build and dark hair. They were laughing, their body language close, too close for comfort. Another photo showed them walking together, her hand briefly brushing his arm. My stomach dropped as I stared at the images. They didn't scream affair, but they whispered it, softly yet persistently. And then came the final piece of evidence, a recording of a conversation the investigator had managed to capture during one of their lunches. Ryan: I still can't believe you're going through with it. The baby, I mean. Laura: It's not as simple as you think, Ryan. I made my choice and I'm sticking to it. But you knew that from the beginning. Ryan: Does he know? About us? Laura hesitates. No, and he doesn't need to. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. There it was, confirmation of my worst fears. Laura was having an affair, and the child she carried might not even be mine. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Betrayal burned in my chest, but beneath the anger was an ache so profound it left me breathless. This was the woman I had loved, the mother of my child, or so I had believed. The next few days were a haze of anger and disbelief. Every interaction with Laura steeped in a quiet tension she seemed oblivious to. I couldn't confront her, not yet. I needed time to think, to plan. The pain of her betrayal weighed heavily on me, but more than anything, I was determined not to act rashly. If I was going to confront her, I wanted the upper hand. I wanted her to know that I wasn't some clueless fool, oblivious to the cracks in our life. And so, I began to prepare. One evening, Laura mentioned she had a late meeting at work. Her words were casual, almost too casual as she avoided my gaze. Don't wait up for me, she said, grabbing her bag and planting a quick kiss on my cheek before heading out the door. I waited until I heard her car pull out of the driveway before I sprang into action. I had installed a GPS tracker on her vehicle a week earlier, a decision I had agonized over but now felt justified. Pulling up the app on my phone, I watched. The blinking dot moved through the city streets. Her car didn't head toward her office. Instead, it stopped at a small boutique hotel on the other side of town. My pulse raced as I arrived at the hotel, parking a few spots away from her car. I sat in my car for a moment, gathering my thoughts and summoning the courage to face whatever was waiting for me inside. If this is the truth, I need to see it with my own eyes, I told myself. I entered the lobby, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glare over the polished floors. The receptionist barely glanced up as I walked past, pretending to belong there. I had no room number, no real plan, just the bitter resolve that had brought me here. As luck would have it, I didn't need to search for long. Stepping out of the elevator, laughing softly, was Laura, her hand brushing the arm of Ryan, the man from the photos. They didn't see me at first, too engrossed in their conversation to notice the man standing at the end of the hallway. When they finally did see me, Laura's expression froze. Her laughter died in her throat, replaced by a look of pure panic. Ryan stiffened, his eyes darting between me and Laura, as though calculating the odds of escape. David. Laura's voice was barely a whisper, her guilt written plainly across her face. Don't, I said, my voice cold and steady. Don't say my name like that. The confrontation that followed was ugly, messy, raw, and full of truths neither of us were ready to face. Laura tried to deny it at first, stumbling over half-truths and excuses that crumbled under the weight of my evidence. When she finally realized there was no point in lying, she broke down, tears streaming down her face as she begged for forgiveness. It wasn't supposed to happen, she sobbed. I didn't mean for it to go this far, David, I was lonely. You were always so busy, and Ryan, he was there. He made me feel seen. Her words stung, each one a dagger to my already shattered heart. You were lonely? I echoed, my voice thick with disbelief. And you think that justifies this? While I was working myself to the bone to provide for us, for this baby, you were... What? Meeting him at hotels? Laughing behind my back? She shook her head, trying to reach for me, but I stepped back, putting distance between us. You don't understand, she pleaded. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But the baby is yours, David, I swear it. I stared at her, searching her face for any semblance of truth, but all I saw was a woman who had betrayed everything we'd built together. "You swear?" I asked, my voice low. "After everything I've seen, you expect me to take your word for it?" Ryan, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "Look, man, this is between you two. I didn't mean to—" "Shut up," I snapped, my gaze cutting through him like a blade. "You don't get to talk. Not here. Not now." He backed down immediately, raising his hands in surrender. "Fine, I'll go." But I wasn't done. "No. You're going to stay right here. You're both going to stay, because I want answers." The hours that followed were a blur of accusations, confessions, and bitter revelations. By the time it was over, I was exhausted, physically, emotionally, and mentally drained. I left them standing in that hallway, unable to stomach their presence any longer. As I drove home, the reality of my situation began to sink in. My marriage was over, shattered beyond repair. The woman I had loved, the life we had built, it was all gone. And yet, beneath the pain, a new resolve began to take shape. This wasn't the end. Not for me. Laura had taken so much from me already, but she wouldn't take my future. If this child was truly mine, I would fight for custody, for the chance to be a father despite her betrayal. And if the child wasn't mine, well, I would cross that bridge when I came to it. For now, I needed to focus on picking up the pieces of my life. The days following that fateful confrontation were a blur of paperwork, late-night calls to my lawyer, and endless thoughts that kept me awake at night. I felt like a man trapped between heartbreak and rage, trying to maintain composure for the sake of my future. Laura, meanwhile, was sending me messages constantly, some apologetic, some defensive, and others trying to negotiate a way forward. I ignored most of them. One message, however, caught my eye. "David, I scheduled a paternity test. You deserve to know the truth." A week later, I found myself in a sterile clinic, the fluorescent lights too bright and the air too cold. Laura sat, a few seats away, looking small and nervous in her oversized sweater. She kept glancing at me, hoping for some kind of acknowledgement, but I didn't give her any. I couldn't. Not after everything. The nurse called us in, and the procedure was quick, a simple cheek swab for both of us and a more invasive one for Laura. She winced slightly during the process, and for a moment I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Afterward, she tried to speak to me as we walked out of the clinic. "David," she began, her voice trembling, "I know I've hurt you in ways I can never take back, but I need you to know, no matter what happens, I want to fix this. I want to make things right." I stopped in my tracks, turning to face her. "Make things right?" I repeated, my voice low but laced with anger. "You can't fix this, Laura. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them. And so do I." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't wait to see them fall. I walked away, leaving her standing in the clinic parking lot. The results came in 2 weeks later. My lawyer called me first, his tone cautious. "David, the test confirms. The child is yours." I hung up without saying much, my emotions a whirlwind of relief, confusion, and renewed anger. Laura had lied and cheated, but at least this baby, the key, one thing I had left to hold on to, was mine. Still, this revelation didn't change the fact that our marriage was over. The divorce proceedings were brutal, as I expected. Laura had hired an aggressive attorney, clearly aiming for as much as she could get, half of the house, half of my savings, even spousal support. It was infuriating to watch her sit across from me in court playing the victim, while I was the one reeling from her betrayal, but I had prepared for this. Thanks to my lawyer, the evidence of her infidelity, the hotel photos, the messages, the timeline of her lies, painted a damning picture. The judge wasn't impressed with her claims, of entitlement. And in the end, the court ruled in my favor. She got a fraction of what she'd asked for and no spousal support. Most importantly, I secured shared custody of our child. I wasn't going to let Laura's actions rob me of the chance to be a father. Months passed, and slowly life began to regain a sense of normalcy. I threw myself into work, using the hours to distract myself from the emptiness left behind by Laura's betrayal. When my daughter, Emma, was born, everything changed. Holding her for the first time, I felt a rush of emotions so intense it nearly brought me to tears. She was perfect. Tiny fingers, soft curls, and a gaze that seemed to hold the entire world. In that moment, I knew I had a purpose again. Emma was my world now, and I would do everything in my power to give her the life she deserved. As for Laura, she tried to reach out a few times, inviting me to talk, to co-parent more amicably. But I kept my distance, limiting our interactions to what was necessary for Emma's sake. I didn't trust her anymore, and I wasn't sure I ever would. One day, while dropping Emma off at Laura's apartment, I noticed Ryan's car parked outside. The sight barely registered anymore. Whatever life Laura chose to live now was her business. I had no desire to look back. As I drove away, Emma cooing softly in the back seat, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. The past was behind me. And though the scars of betrayal would always remain, they no longer defined me. I was stronger now, more resolute, and determined to build a future for myself and my daughter, one free of lies and heartbreak. This was my second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. Months turned into years, and the chaos that had once consumed my life slowly became a distant memory. Emma grew like a little whirlwind, her laughter filling every corner of my home. Her joy was infectious, her curiosity boundless, and her mere presence was enough to keep me grounded. Being a father was more fulfilling than I could have ever imagined. I'd learned to find happiness in the small moments, reading bedtime stories, teaching Emma to ride her bike, and watching her eyes light up when we baked cookies together. She was my anchor, my reason for moving forward. Laura, on the other hand, seemed trapped in the cycle she'd created for herself. I heard whispers here and there, friends telling me she and Ryan were on and off, their relationship riddled with the same mistrust that had destroyed ours. It wasn't my concern anymore. I remained polite during custody exchanges, but that was the extent of our interaction. One day, however, Laura showed up at my door unexpectedly. Emma was staying with me that weekend, and I'd just finished setting up her new play set in the backyard. When I opened the door, I was met with a version of Laura I hadn't seen in years, frazzled, anxious, and visibly worn down. "David," she began, wringing her hands. "Can we talk?" I leaned against the doorframe, keeping my expression neutral. "About what?" She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the ground. I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. I wasn't expecting that. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. "I know I hurt you," she continued, her voice cracking, "and I've paid the price for it. Ryan and it didn't work out. He wasn't who I thought he was. I lost so much because of my mistakes, and I needed to tell you that I regret it all. You didn't deserve any of it." I studied her for a moment, the woman who had once been my entire world. Her words were raw, but I wasn't sure if they were sincere or simply an attempt to unburden herself. Either way, they didn't change anything. "I appreciate you saying that," I said evenly. "But Laura, that chapter of my life is closed. I've moved on, and I hope you can too." Her face fell slightly, but she nodded, perhaps realizing that no apology could undo the damage. "I hope you're happy, David. You and Emma." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the doorway. I felt no anger, no sadness, just a quiet acceptance. Her apology was years too late, but it didn't matter anymore. I had built a new life, one she wasn't a part of. Not long after, I found myself opening up to the idea of dating again. It was a slow process. I was cautious, guarded, and determined to prioritize Emma above all else. But eventually I met someone who made me believe in love again. Her name was Rachel, a kind and intelligent woman who radiated warmth. She adored Emma, and Emma adored her in return. Our relationship grew naturally, built on trust and mutual respect. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of wholeness I hadn't realized I was missing. One evening, as Rachel and I watched Emma play in the backyard, she turned to me with a gentle smile. "You've been through so much, David. But the way you love her, the way you've rebuilt your life, it's inspiring." I wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "She gave me a reason to keep going. And meeting you? That was just the universe telling me I deserve a second chance." Rachel leaned her head against my shoulder, and together we watched Emma laugh and chase bubbles under the setting sun. The pain of the past was still there, buried deep, but it no longer controlled me. I had found peace, love, and a future worth looking forward to. This was my redemption, my new beginning, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. Months passed, and life continued its steady, peaceful rhythm. Rachel became more than just a partner. She became a cornerstone of my life. She didn't try to replace Laura in Emma's eyes, but instead carved out her own unique bond with my daughter. It was heartwarming to watch them together, Emma teaching Rachel her favorite silly dances, Rachel helping Emma with school projects, and the two of them conspiring to bake the perfect cookies, usually ending up with flour everywhere. For me, Rachel brought light into places I hadn't realized were still dark. She challenged me, encouraged me, and reminded me that love didn't have to come with conditions or betrayals. With her, I felt safe. I felt seen. One chilly autumn morning, as the leaves blanketed the ground in hues of gold and red, I found myself standing in the kitchen with a small velvet box in my hand. I'd been carrying it around for weeks, waiting for the right moment. The idea of proposing to Rachel filled me with equal parts excitement and nerves. After everything I'd been through, the thought of committing again wasn't something I took lightly. That afternoon, we took Emma to the park. The crisp air carried the scent of fallen leaves, and Emma's laughter rang out as she climbed the jungle gym. Rachel and I sat on a nearby bench, sipping hot cider and watching her play. "This feels perfect," Rachel said, her eyes fixed on Emma. "It's like this is where we're supposed to be." Her words settled over me like a warm blanket, and in that moment, I knew. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the box. "Rachel," I began, my voice steady but soft, "you've brought so much joy into our lives. You've shown me that love can be kind, patient, and real. I never thought I'd want to take this step again, but with you, it feels right. It feels like home." I opened the box to reveal the ring. Her hand flew to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. "Will you marry me?" For a moment, she was speechless, her emotions overwhelming her. Then she nodded emphatically, her voice breaking as she said, "Yes, David. 1,000 times yes." Emma, noticing the commotion, ran over and immediately gasped when she saw the ring. "Does this mean Rachel is going to be my stepmom?" she asked, her wide eyes darting between the two of us. I knelt to her level, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Only if you're okay with that, sweetheart." Emma's face lit up, and she threw her arms around Rachel. "Of course. Rachel's the best." The months leading up to the wedding were filled with joy and anticipation. It was a small, intimate ceremony with only close friends and family in attendance. Emma was our flower girl, beaming with pride as she scattered petals down the aisle. When Rachel and I exchanged vows, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the pain that had shaped me, for the lessons I'd learned, and for the second chance I'd been given. As I slid the ring onto her finger, I knew this time was different. This time, I was building something unshakable. In the years that followed, our little family flourished. Emma grew into a confident, compassionate young woman, her bright spirit a constant source of inspiration. Rachel and I navigated the challenges of life together, always leaning on each other for support. Laura, though still present in Emma's life, remained on the periphery. We co-parented amicably, but our paths rarely crossed outside of Emma's. Milestones. I wished her no ill will. If anything, I hoped she'd found her own version of peace. As for me, I had everything I'd ever wanted, a loving partner, a beautiful daughter, and a life that felt whole again. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer defined me. They were simply reminders of how far I'd come. Standing in our backyard one summer evening, watching Rachel and Emma chase fireflies under a sky painted with stars, I realized something profound. Life isn't about avoiding pain. It's about finding the strength to heal, to grow, and to love again, and I had done just that. As the years passed, our family became a testament to resilience, a patchwork of healing and hope that wrapped itself around us like a protective cloak. There were moments when the past threatened to resurface, whispers of old memories that tried to creep back into my mind, but I pushed them away, not out of denial, but out of strength. I had come to terms with the chapters that had already been written, and the story I was living now was one I had the power to shape. Yet life, in its infinite wisdom, never stops testing you. As we entered a new chapter of normalcy, new challenges began to emerge. Not from betrayal or infidelity, but from the silent complexities of growing up and navigating the world. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the world outside seemed suspended in time, and the air was thick with the scent of fresh rain. Rachel and I sat on the porch, sipping our wine, the sound of crickets filling the air. Emma, now in her teenage years, had gone off to spend the weekend with her cousins, leaving us to our own peaceful bubble. "Sometimes I feel like I'm holding my breath," Rachel said, her voice laced with a touch of vulnerability. She glanced at me, and her eyes softened. "Like we've come so far, and I don't ever want to lose it." I could hear the tremor of fear beneath her words. It was a fear I understood all too well. We had built something beautiful from the ashes of our past, but the fragility of it was never lost on either of us. We had both learned that love wasn't just something you fell into. It was something you chose, every day, through action, through trust, through patience. "I don't think we'll ever lose it," I said quietly, taking her hand in mine. "As long as we keep choosing each other, keep moving forward, we'll be okay." She smiled softly, though the weight of her past, of her own journey, still clung to her like a shadow. "I don't deserve you," she whispered, her voice distant, as though she were speaking more to herself than to me. I shook my head, leaning in to kiss her forehead. "You deserve everything, Rachel. You deserve all the good in the world." Her eyes filled with a quiet gratitude, and for a moment there was nothing but the sound of our breathing, the pulse of the world going on around us. It wasn't long after that evening that Emma returned home with a glint in her eyes, a piece of news she couldn't wait to share. "Mom, Dad," she said, her tone giddy, "I've been thinking about something. I want to get a job, like a real one." Rachel and I exchanged a glance, surprised but pleased by Emma's growing sense of responsibility. She had always been an independent spirit, but hearing her talk about wanting to step into the world on her own was a new step in her journey toward adulthood. "I think that's a great idea, Emma," Rachel said, her voice warm with encouragement. "But what kind of job are you thinking about?" "I don't know yet," Emma replied, tapping her chin as if deep in thought. Maybe at that little cafe in town, or I could help at the animal shelter. It was at that moment, watching my daughter take another step into her own, that I realized just how far we had all come. She had grown into someone thoughtful, driven, and kind, qualities that Rachel and I had nurtured together, even if our pasts had been fractured and imperfect. But just as life had a way of testing us, so did time. One day I received a letter. The handwriting was unfamiliar, and the paper smelled faintly of perfume, something floral, something that lingered with a trace of nostalgia I couldn't quite place. I opened it cautiously, scanning the words inside. David, I hope this letter finds you well. I know it's been a long time, and perhaps you never expected to hear from me again. But I've been thinking a lot about the past and the choices I made, and I need to apologize. I'm not sure if you'll ever be ready to hear it, but I owe you an explanation. I hope this doesn't reopen old wounds. I just wanted you to know that I have always regretted what I did to you, and I hope you and Emma have found the happiness you deserve. Please know that I carry the weight of those decisions every day. Laura. I stared at the letter, my fingers trembling. The words felt like they had been written a lifetime ago, yet they were as fresh as the air I breathed. A flood of emotions swept through me, anger, sadness, confusion, but most of all, release. I knew that I had made peace with the past. Laura's words weren't necessary for my healing, but they were a final echo, a soft acknowledgement that the storm had passed. And with it, I was free. That evening, after Rachel and Emma had gone to bed, I sat outside under the stars, the letter in my hands. I thought of all the people who had come in and out of my life, the betrayals, the heartbreaks, the lessons learned. The days that followed were a mixture of peace and reflection. Life had become a gentle rhythm, the kind that settles in after a storm. We were no longer merely surviving, we were thriving, each day a testament to how far we had come from the turbulent past. Yet, even in this calm, I couldn't help but sense a quiet unease stirring within me. The letter from Laura, though a closure of sorts, had left a lingering trace in my mind. It was a reminder of things I thought I had buried deep, a reminder of how fragile even the strongest of bonds could be. I found myself questioning everything, once again, wondering if I had truly healed or if I had merely learned how to mask the scars. One afternoon, as I sat in my office sorting through old papers, I heard Rachel's soft footsteps in the hallway. She knocked lightly on the door before stepping in, a cup of tea in hand, her expression unreadable. "I thought you might need a break," she said, her voice quiet but tender. "You've been at it all morning." I smiled, grateful for her thoughtfulness, and accepted the tea. As I took a sip, I noticed the faint line between her brows, a look that hadn't been there before. "Is something on your mind?" I asked, setting the cup down and meeting her gaze. Rachel hesitated for a moment, her fingers tapping lightly on the edge of the doorframe. "I don't know," she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "It's just, sometimes I feel like we're still not fully whole, like we're walking around with pieces missing." I studied her face carefully, the way her eyes darted away as if she were afraid to let me see the depth of her vulnerability. I could tell that something was weighing on her heart, something that went beyond the surface of our daily lives. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice soft, the concern deepening in my chest. Rachel sat down beside me, taking a deep breath. "I've been thinking about everything we've been through, and I don't know if I've ever truly forgiven myself. Not completely. Not for what I did, for what I put us through." Her confession hung in the air like a heavy fog, and I felt the weight of her words settle deep within me. It wasn't anger or resentment that stirred in me, but a deep, aching understanding. I had forgiven her, long ago, in fact, But hearing her say it aloud, hearing her question her own forgiveness, made me realize how much pain she was still carrying. It wasn't just a matter of rebuilding trust between us. It was about her finding peace within herself. "I think you need to forgive yourself," I said, my voice steady but filled with empathy. "I did, a long time ago, and I think we both need to stop holding on to the past so tightly. It's not about forgetting, it's about letting go." Rachel looked at me, her eyes brimming with unshed tears, her lips trembling. "But how do I let go, David? How do I forgive myself when I don't even know if I deserve it?" I could feel the weight of her words pressing against my chest, and for a moment I was paralyzed by the rawness of her pain. It was a familiar ache, one I had once known intimately, the feeling of unworthiness, the struggle to reconcile your past actions with your present desires for redemption. I took her hand in mine, gently squeezing it, offering her the silent strength I knew she needed. "You've already done so much, Rachel," I said softly. "You've shown me, and more importantly, you've shown Emma that you're capable of growth, of change. That's the most important part. You don't have to be perfect. None of us do." She let out a shaky breath, her shoulders sagging with the release of some unspoken weight. For a moment, we sat in silence, the hum of the world outside filling the space between us. The stillness wasn't uncomfortable, but rather it was a shared moment of understanding, a moment where the past could rest for just a little longer. In the weeks that followed, Rachel and I found ourselves in a rhythm of healing that felt both natural and deliberate. We talked more about everything, about the future, about Emma growing up, about the fears that still lingered in the corners of our minds. It wasn't about pretending the past didn't exist. It was about accepting it as part of our story and choosing to move forward despite it. Emma's new job at the animal shelter became a topic of many late-night conversations. She loved it, the work bringing a new sense of purpose to her life. Rachel and I often joked about how much Emma reminded us of ourselves at that age, full of ambition, yet uncertain about where to channel it. But there was no denying that she was growing into someone remarkable, someone who could teach us much as we had taught her. One evening after dinner, we sat together in the living room, the warm glow of the fireplace flickering in the background. Emma was chatting animatedly about a new project at the shelter, her enthusiasm filling the room. The months that followed felt like a delicate balancing act between the past, present, and future. Time seemed to stretch, then contract, like the steady pulse of the seasons. Rachel and I navigated this space with caution, but also with hope. Hope that the mistakes we had made would no longer define us. Hope that the scars we carried could become the foundation for something stronger. Emma's college application process began, and with it, a new wave of emotions. I found myself wondering if she was truly ready for the world that awaited her beyond our home. In some ways, I was more terrified than she was. But I also saw something in her, something that I hadn't fully recognized before. A quiet strength, an assurance that despite everything, she would be okay. We spent nights poring over her essays, helping her craft a vision of her future. And even though Rachel and I were both often lost in the maze of what lay ahead, we found solace in these small acts of support. But one afternoon, as I sat in my office, an unexpected knock on the door disrupted my thoughts. I looked up to find Laura standing in the doorway, her presence unsettling in a way I couldn't explain. "David," she said, her voice hesitant. "Can we talk?" For a moment I couldn't respond. I wasn't sure I even wanted to. But the weight of her visit, the silence between us, pressed down heavily on my chest. She hadn't been part of our lives for so long, yet here she was, knocking on my door as if she had every right to be there. "Come in," I finally said, my tone guarded but not unkind. She stepped inside, her expression tight with something I couldn't name. She closed the door behind her, the sound echoing in the otherwise quiet room. "I wanted to apologize," she began, sitting down across from me. I never should have been a part of that. I've thought about it a lot, and I've realized just how wrong I was. I wasn't sure what I had expected from her, but it certainly wasn't this." My thoughts scrambled, my heart racing a little faster in my chest. "I don't know what I can say to make up for it," she continued, her gaze lowering to her hands. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I owe you that much. And if there's anything I can do to make things right, I want to try." I watched her, trying to decipher the sincerity in her eyes. A part of me wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, to ask why she had done what she did. But I knew deep down that what I really wanted was peace, not just for me, but for Rachel, for Emma, for the future. "I'm not sure you can make things right," I said quietly, my voice a mixture of exhaustion and guarded wisdom. "But I appreciate that you're trying. That's more than I expected." There was a long pause, and in that silence, something shifted. The weight of the past, of all the hurt and betrayal, didn't disappear, but it felt somehow less suffocating. Laura was here, yes, but she was no longer the woman I had once known. She was a stranger now, someone who had played a part in a chapter that was long closed. "I'll leave you to it," she said, standing up, her tone heavier than I'd expected. "But I'm sorry, David. Truly. For everything." I nodded, watching her walk out of the room. As the door closed behind her, I was left with a strange sense of closure. It wasn't the resolution I had wanted, but perhaps it was the one I needed. That evening, when Rachel came home, I didn't mention Laura's visit. It wasn't because I didn't want to. It was because I knew somehow that there was no need to. We had fought so hard to get here, to rebuild something we thought had been lost forever. The past was behind us, and though it would always be a part of our story, it no longer had the power to dictate our lives. As we sat down for dinner that night, Emma talking excitedly about her latest volunteering project, Rachel glanced at me, sensing that something was different. "Everything. Okay?" she asked, her voice soft but steady, her eyes filled with that familiar concern. I met her gaze, searching for the right words, but in that moment, I realized there was no need for them. There was nothing more to explain. "I'm okay," I said, simply, my hand reaching out to hers. "We're okay." Rachel smiled, and for the first time in what felt like a long time, I truly believed it. The storm that had once threatened to tear us apart had passed. What remained was something more, enduring, something deeper. Not perfection, but something that could withstand the test of time. As we finished dinner, I found myself thinking about the future, about Emma's dreams, about what was still left to discover in our lives. The unknown no longer felt terrifying. There was peace in it, a quiet promise that whatever came next, we would face it together. The silence in the room was suffocating, as if the very air between us had become thick with uncertainty. My mind raced with thoughts, questions that I couldn't yet bring myself to voice. The phone in my hand felt heavier with each passing second, as if it were no longer a mere device, but a burden I didn't know how to bear. Rachel's hand rested on mine, and the warmth of her touch was almost enough to draw me back from the brink. Almost. I didn't pull away, but I didn't lean into it either. My thoughts were swirling too fast, colliding with one another in a disorienting dance. This message, this second shadow from her past, felt like an echo of the betrayal we had both tried to leave behind. I wanted to believe her, wanted so desperately, to trust that the past wasn't creeping into our present again, but the lingering doubts gnawed at me. What if I was just fooling myself? I thought, as the image of that intimate message flashed across my mind. What if the cracks we thought were sealed are still wide open, waiting to tear us apart again? I took a deep breath, attempting to steady myself. Rachel was looking at me now, her eyes pleading for reassurance. She had been through so much already, and yet I couldn't help but wonder if I could ever truly trust her again. Could I ever truly let go of what happened? She wasn't making excuses now. There was no defensive posturing, no blaming anyone but herself. Her vulnerability hung in the air, raw and unguarded, and part of me wanted to reach out, to hold her, to forgive her without a second thought. But there was a wall now, built brick by brick over the years. First from the affair, and now from the haunting presence of this new message. The wall wasn't insurmountable, but it was high, and it seemed to stretch endlessly. I don't know what to say anymore, Rachel, I said quietly, the words almost strangled in my throat. I don't understand why you're still holding on to something like this. We've been through so much, and it's like you can't let go of whatever this is. I need to know if we're still in this together or if I'm just holding on to something that's already broken. Her expression shifted, the weight of my words settling heavily on her shoulders. She glanced at the phone again as though the message were still alive, still echoing in her mind. I could see the conflict play out across her face, the love she felt for me, the guilt she carried, the fear of losing everything. It was almost unbearable to witness. I never wanted to hurt you again, David. I swear, she whispered, her voice breaking as she fought to keep her composure. I've been fighting my own demons. I thought I had put everything behind me. But the truth is, part of me was always afraid that I hadn't really earned your forgiveness. That maybe you'd always see me as someone who betrayed you. Her words struck deep, and I felt the familiar sting of the past surge within me. Had I truly forgiven her, or had I simply convinced myself that I had, I wondered. Her affair had shattered something within me, and though I had tried to rebuild, I couldn't shake the sense that the foundation we were standing on wasn't as strong as it seemed. Rachel, I began, my voice thick with emotion. I wanted to believe that we could move past everything, that we could rebuild. But there's so much that's unsaid, so much that's still haunting me. She leaned closer then, her hand squeezing mine tighter, almost desperately. We can rebuild, she said, her voice pleading, though there was a quiet certainty in her words. If you'll just let me prove it. If you'll just let me show you that I can be the person you need me to be. I'm not perfect, but I love you, David. I want to make this right. The room was suffused with a tension that bordered on unbearable, as if every word we spoke carried the weight of everything we had been through and everything we still had yet to face. My heart was pounding in my chest, torn between the remnants of love that lingered between us and the unshakable fear that I had already given too much of myself, that I might lose everything if I continued down this path. I need time, Rachel, I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. I can't give you an answer now. I'm not sure where we go from here, but I need to figure out if I can trust you again. If I can trust myself in this. Her face fell, and for the first time, in what felt like years, I saw the real weight of her regret, the full measure of her remorse. It was as though she had been holding on to some last shred of hope that I could give her the absolution she craved. But now she was realizing that forgiveness wasn't something I could simply hand to her. It wasn't something that could be fixed overnight. The silence stretched on, and we both sat there, the distance between us seeming to grow with every passing second. The days that followed were marked by a quiet uncertainty, as if the air around us had grown heavier, thicker, with the weight of unspoken things. Rachel and I went about our lives as best we could, but the subtle shift in the dynamics of our relationship was impossible to ignore. It wasn't that we weren't trying. It was just that the cracks we had worked so hard to cover seemed to widen with every passing moment. Trust, once broken, was never something easily repaired. In the evenings, when the house was still and the lights dimmed low, I would find myself staring at the shadows, my thoughts unraveling in the silence. Rachel would be in the next room, moving through her own private space of contemplation, but we rarely spoke of what had happened. Our conversations, when they did happen, were brief, guarded, fragments of normalcy in a landscape that felt fractured, beyond recognition. I could see the changes in her, too. There was a certain vulnerability in the way she moved around the house, a hesitation in her touch when we would pass each other. She was quieter, more thoughtful, almost as though she was waiting for something, waiting for me to give her a sign, a clear path forward. But the truth was, I was waiting too. I was waiting for some proof, some undeniable shift that would reassure me that we could make it through this, that we could start over again. But then came the phone call. I was sitting on the couch one afternoon, flipping through the pages of an old novel, when the sharp ring of my phone pulled me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the screen, an unknown number. My heart skipped, a tightness forming in my chest. I almost didn't pick it up, but something in me told me to answer. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was something deeper, some instinct that told me this call would matter. "Hello?" I answered, my voice betraying the unease I felt. "David?" The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but unmistakably male. There was a slight tremor in his voice, as though he wasn't sure whether he should be speaking to me or not. "This is Mike. I, work with Rachel." The name struck me like a bolt of lightning. Mike, her coworker, the same man who had been mentioned in the messages, the same one who had been at the heart of the affair that had nearly destroyed everything between us. I could feel the blood rushing in my ears, the tightness in my throat. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out, my pulse quickening. I need to talk to you about something," Mike continued, his voice hurried, as if he knew he was walking on fragile ground. "It's about Rachel, and well, I think you need to know what happened." I felt my stomach drop. Every muscle in my body tensed, the air around me suddenly suffocating. What was he going to tell me? The questions bombarded me, each one more terrifying than the last. "Go ahead," I said, barely able to steady my own voice. I wasn't sure if I even wanted to hear it, but I couldn't turn away now. I had to know. Mike took a deep breath before speaking again, as though bracing himself for something significant. "I know this isn't easy for you to hear, but Rachel, she's been really distant lately. She's been going through some things she hasn't been telling you about. And I think she's trying to protect you from the truth. The truth about everything that happened between us." My heart skipped a beat. I could hear the heavy silence between us, and I waited, my grip tightening on the phone. "What do you mean?" My voice was barely a whisper now, barely able to carry the weight of the question. "She's been telling you that it was just one mistake," Mike said, his voice growing steadier now. "That it was over. But I don't think she's been completely honest with you. She hasn't told you the full story, David. And I think you deserve to hear it from me." Every word was a punch to my gut. I could feel my breath hitch, my heart racing as I processed the words. The truth. The full truth. What could that even mean? "I think you need to sit down," Mike continued, his tone softening now. "This isn't just about an affair. There's more. And Rachel, well, she's been carrying a heavy burden because of it, but I don't want you to find out from anyone else. I don't want you to be blindsided again." The knot in my chest was so tight now I could barely breathe. What could be worse than what I already knew? I rubbed my forehead, my fingers trembling as the silence stretched. I wasn't sure I was ready for whatever was coming next, but I had to hear it. I had to know the full extent of the betrayal. "Tell me," I said, my voice low and rough, the words barely escaping. "I think it would be better if you heard it directly from Rachel," Mike replied, his voice tight with hesitation. "But all I'll say for now is this. It's not just a physical affair. There's something much deeper here, something that could change everything for you." As I walked toward the bedroom, my steps felt heavy, like the ground itself was reluctant to bear the weight of what I was about to face. Each step felt measured, deliberate, but my heart hammered in my chest, each beat loud and insistent, as though it were warning me of the storm ahead. When I reached the door, I paused. The soft murmur of Rachel's voice drifted from inside. She was on the phone, speaking in hushed tones. I couldn't make out the words, but I could tell from the cadence of her speech that something was off. It wasn't her usual comforting tone, the one I had known for years. No, this was different. More guarded, more distant. The part of me that had hoped for a simple resolution felt a bitter knot tighten in my stomach. I had been clinging to the hope that the affair had been a fleeting moment of weakness, that it had ended with the apology, with the promise of healing. But this new feeling, this new anxiety that had settled in my chest, told me that the resolution I had longed for was not going to come easily. I leaned against the doorframe, letting the seconds stretch into minutes, hearing her voice rise and fall but not quite comprehending the words. What could she possibly be talking about now? Who was she talking to? And why did it feel like everything was slipping away just beyond my reach? I needed to know. I had to know. I knocked gently, more to announce my presence than to interrupt. The soft thud echoed in the stillness of the room, and Rachel's voice faltered on the other end of the line. She didn't answer immediately, and for a moment I thought she might try to hide, to sweep everything under the rug once more. But then the phone clicked off, and she turned toward the door, her face drained of all color. The moment our eyes met, I saw the tremble in her lip, the way her hands clutched at her robe, as if it were the only thing anchoring her to reality. She was trying to compose herself, but the effort was futile. I could see right through it. I stepped into the room slowly, my movements deliberate, purposeful. "Who were you talking to?" I asked, my voice cold, controlled, though my insides felt like they were being pulled apart. Rachel glanced down, her eyes flicking nervously, not meeting mine. It's nothing. Just work stuff. I cut her off. "It's not nothing, Rachel. It never was." I stepped closer, the space between us shrinking with every word I spoke. My chest felt tight, constricted, as if my own breath was betraying me. But I pressed on, my voice low but firm. "I know about Mike. About everything." Her face paled, and she took a shaky step back, as if trying to distance herself from the truth that had come crashing into the room. But there was no escape, now. No more hiding behind half-formed lies. I didn't want you to find out like this," she whispered, the words thick with regret. "I didn't want to hurt you again." But the damage had already been done. My thoughts raced, tumbling over themselves, scrambling for meaning. She didn't want me to find out. That was what stung the most. That she hadn't trusted me enough to come clean, to be honest with me from the beginning. Instead, she had kept me in the dark, tangled in the web of lies she had spun with him. Mike. God, Mike. I need the full story, Rachel. No more lies, no more omissions. I'm done with all the silence. My voice was growing harsher now, a part of me desperately fighting to keep control, to hold on to some semblance of my own dignity in the face of all this betrayal. Rachel swallowed hard, her eyes finally meeting mine with a raw vulnerability I hadn't seen in her in months. She hesitated for a long moment, as if she were weighing her words carefully, choosing them with the precision of someone who knew that what she said next could either save or destroy everything. "I never meant for it to go as far as it did," she began, her voice trembling. It was just supposed to be a one-time thing, just to feel something, anything, that wasn't empty or suffocating. She let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she wiped a tear away. But then it happened again, and again, and with each time I convinced myself that it didn't matter, that it wouldn't hurt you if I kept it secret. I was so wrong. The confession hung in the air like smoke, thick and heavy. The more she spoke, the more I realized how deep the betrayal ran. It wasn't just the affair, it was everything that had led up to it. The neglect, the emotional distance, the lies, everything that had driven her to seek solace in the arms of another man. But that wasn't even the worst of it. I don't know why I didn't stop, she continued, her voice breaking, barely audible. Mike and I, we were supposed to be friends. It was just supposed to be innocent. But it wasn't. I think I used him, David. I used him to escape my own guilt. And when I found out I was pregnant, she paused, her breath hitching. I stood there in the suffocating silence, watching her tremble, but I could barely hear her anymore. The world felt muffled, distant, like I was standing at the edge of a precipice, looking down at a vast, empty void. The weight of her words had settled into my chest, and it felt like I was carrying an unbearable burden. She didn't know who the father was. The phrase echoed relentlessly in my mind, a jagged shard of doubt twisting deeper with each breath. It was the question that hung over everything now, the most painful, the most paralyzing one. How had I missed it? How had I been so blind? I could see Rachel now, her eyes swollen with tears, her voice so small as she spoke of regret, of guilt. But it all felt so distant, so unmoored from the reality of what had happened. She was sorry. She was full of remorse, but nothing about her words could change the truth. Her affair, the uncertainty of the pregnancy, her betrayal, it all piled up like a crushing weight. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but it was hard to breathe. It was hard to think. My fingers clenched at my sides, and I could feel the tension coiling tighter within me, like a storm gathering on the horizon. I had to make a choice. I had to make a decision. But what was the right decision? I don't even know where to begin, I finally said, the words coming out in a rasp, like sandpaper against my throat. My voice sounded foreign to me, distant. What was I even supposed to say? Rachel took a tentative step toward me, her hands trembling as she reached out, as if hoping I would accept her touch. But I couldn't bring myself to reach back. The distance between us felt insurmountable now. The affection, the trust, the bond we had once shared, all of it had been shattered into pieces, scattered in every direction, out of reach. You've been my everything, I continued, the words slipping out before I could stop them, my heart cracking with each syllable. You've been the one I trusted, the one I loved. And now I'm standing here looking at you, and I don't even know who you are anymore. I shook my head, the ache in my chest deepening with each passing second. You lied to me, Rachel. You betrayed me in ways I never thought possible. She flinched at my words, her face crumpling as though the weight of them struck her physically. But I wasn't finished. The emotions that had been simmering inside me, suppressed for so long, now rose to the surface in a flood. I can't just pretend like everything is okay, I continued, my voice trembling with raw pain. You broke us. You broke me. And now I'm left here, wondering how the hell I'm supposed to pick up the pieces of something that's already been destroyed. I felt a shudder ripple through me. I wanted to feel anger, but all I felt was numb and broken. The pieces of my world, the things I had built with Rachel, seemed so insignificant now. How do you rebuild after everything has come undone? Rachel's voice was barely audible when she spoke again. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, she whispered, her words trembling. I never wanted to hurt you. I never thought I'd end up here. Lost and alone. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how much she had hurt me, how much she had taken from me. But something inside me stopped me. I realized that no matter how much I yelled or cried, no matter how much I tore at the walls between us, it wouldn't fix anything. It wouldn't bring back the trust. It wouldn't change the fact that she had betrayed me in the most intimate way possible. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating, as the storm of emotions inside me continued to churn, leaving me hollow and empty. I couldn't stay here anymore, not with her standing in front of me, not with the weight of her guilt hanging in the air between us. I need to go, I finally said, the words coming out like a whisper, barely a breath. Rachel's eyes widened in panic and she stepped forward, her hands reaching for me, but I backed away instinctively, the space between us widening. David, please, she pleaded. I don't want to lose you. I love you. I need you. I didn't respond immediately. I just turned and walked toward the door, my movements slow but deliberate, as though every step was a quiet battle against the overwhelming tide of emotions. The cool air of the hallway hit me as I opened the door, and for a moment I stood there, staring at the dim light outside the room, as if hoping I could find some clarity, but nothing was clear. Everything was blurred. My future, my trust in her, even my own sense of who I was in this fractured relationship. I don't know what we are anymore, Rachel, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I don't know if I can keep doing this. Her voice followed me, desperate. Please don't leave me, David. Please don't go. I didn't answer her. Instead, I walked out of the room, leaving the silence behind me, trying to push forward. The cold night air greeted me as I stepped out of the house, the quiet streets stretching out before me in a blur of shadows. My feet moved with no particular destination in mind, just a need to escape, to leave the weight of everything behind for a while. I wasn't running away. I was searching for some semblance of clarity, some place where I could think without the suffocating presence of her betrayal hanging over me. What had I done wrong? The question reverberated in my mind, and I couldn't shake it. I kept replaying. The moments, those flashes of doubt, those flickers of unease. I should have known. How could I not have known? Every small change in her behavior, every late night at the office, every offhand comment that now felt like a warning sign. Had I been too trusting, too naive? Or was I simply too in love to see the cracks in the foundation of our relationship? The night was still, broken only by the sound of my footsteps. The world around me felt distant, out of focus, as if I were walking through a dream, one where everything was muted and unclear, save for the sharp, jarring reality that lay just beneath the surface. I found myself near the park, where I used to walk alone on those nights when I needed space to think. The familiar old bench, weathered by years of use, was still there, bathed in the pale glow of a distant street lamp. I sat down, my body heavy, as though each muscle had been dragged through the weight of the evening. I thought she was my person, but now I was questioning everything. Every word we had ever exchanged, every plan we had made, felt like a lie. Could it really be true? Had she truly been with someone else? The very idea of it twisted in my stomach, leaving a sour taste in my mouth. And yet, there was still a part of me that wanted to believe her, to believe that this was a mistake, a momentary lapse, something we could fix. But the rational side of me knew better. She had crossed a line, and I couldn't just erase that. I exhaled sharply, rubbing my hands together in an effort to warm them, though the chill that had settled in my chest wasn't one I could easily dispel. I leaned back on the bench, staring up at the night sky. The moon hung in the sky like a distant sentinel, cold and indifferent to the mess that I had found myself in. What now? The answer seemed impossible. I had no idea what I was supposed to do. Rachel had betrayed me, yes, but this wasn't just about her. It was about me, too. What kind of person would I be if I allowed myself to stay in this relationship? To forgive? To pretend like things could go back to how they were? Would I ever be able to trust her again? I ran a hand through my hair, my thoughts spiraling further into uncertainty. I hadn't even considered the possibility of being a father. How could I think about that now, with all of this uncertainty? I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the crumpled letter that Rachel had left for me. The words she had written were still fresh in my mind, though they felt hollow now. "I'm sorry, David. I never meant to hurt you." I almost wanted to laugh at the simplicity of it, the way she tried to make it sound like an apology could erase everything. But it was more than that. The affair, the pregnancy, none of it could be erased. And deep down, I knew that. Was this really the end? The question sat in my mind like a weight that I couldn't shake. I wasn't ready to make a decision yet. I wasn't sure if I even could, but I knew I had to face it, whatever it was. There was no more running from the truth. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me from my thoughts. I hesitated before pulling it out, already knowing who it was. Rachel. She had probably left me another message. Another apology. Another attempt at repairing what was already beyond repair. But when I unlocked the screen, it wasn't a message from Rachel. It was a call, an incoming call from him. The name on the screen sent a jolt through me, sharp and cold, like ice water splashing on my face. Her coworker, the one she had been seeing behind my back. My thumb hovered over the green button, but I didn't press it. The anger that swelled within me was almost suffocating, but I didn't know if I could face him, or what I would say if I did. I let the phone ring out, the harsh, unbroken tone echoing in the silence. Why had he called me? The question gnawed at me. Did he know? Did he feel any remorse for what had happened? Was he even aware of the destruction he had caused in my life? The phone fell silent, but the anger didn't. It burned beneath my skin, mingled with the confusion and heartbreak that still gripped me. I wanted answers. I needed to understand how this had happened, how everything had unraveled so quickly, so completely. But no answer came. Not yet. For now, I had to sit with the questions. I had to sit with the pain and the uncertainty and the cold, unyielding truth that I couldn't avoid any longer. I sat there for what felt like hours, lost in a haze of conflicting emotions. My body ached with the tension of it all, my thoughts like heavy stones lodged in my chest. The world around me seemed distant, blurry and surreal, as though I were trapped in a dream that wouldn't let me wake up. My hands were cold, my fingers trembling slightly as I gripped the edges of the bench, seeking some sort of anchor in this tumultuous sea of uncertainty. What did I want? I couldn't seem to answer that. My mind was a storm of questions, but no clear resolution was forthcoming. Part of me was angry, furious at the betrayal, at the thought of Rachel, my wife, my partner, so easily slipping away from me and into someone else's arms. But beneath the anger, there was something softer, something more painful, the ache of loss. A part of me mourned not only the affair, but the very idea of the life I had imagined with her, the future we were supposed to share. It was all unraveling, bit by bit, and I couldn't seem to stop it. Did she still love me? The question burned through my thoughts like fire, searing my insides. She hadn't been the same since the pregnancy news. Her energy, her focus, even the way she touched me had changed. She had grown distant, almost unreachable. The thought of her being with him, the coworker, the one she confided in, the one who had given her the attention I wasn't able to, made my stomach churn. Had I been so blind that I missed the signs? Was I too focused on the impending arrival of our child, too distracted by work to notice that she was slipping away? My thoughts were interrupted by the faint buzz of my phone again. I didn't have to look at it to know who it was. Him. For a moment I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the notification. My heart pounded in my chest. Should I answer? Should I confront him now? Was this my chance to put an end to the madness? Would it bring clarity? Or would it simply shatter the last piece of dignity I had left? I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly, trying to steady my racing heartbeat. The anger was still there, but I could feel a different kind of energy building. Too. A quiet resolve, like the calm before a storm. I had to know. I had to hear it from him. Without another thought, I pressed the green button. The call picked up almost immediately, and I could hear his breathing on the other end. I could feel him hesitating, unsure of what to say, as if he knew that I was about to rip the veil off of everything. I didn't speak at first. Instead, I let the silence stretch between us, let him feel the weight of it. After a moment, his voice finally broke through the silence. "David?" I gritted my teeth. So he knew it was me. My pulse quickened. "Don't you dare pretend you don't know who this is," I said, my voice hoarse, barely containing the fury that was rising inside of me. "What the hell is going on between you and my wife?" I heard him take a sharp breath and then another pause, longer this time. I could practically hear the hesitation in his voice when he finally spoke. I didn't mean for this to happen, man." The words felt hollow, weak, as if he was trying to justify something that there was no excuse for. "I don't give a damn what you meant," I shot back. "You slept with her. You knew she was married. You knew we were having a baby. And yet, here we are." The bitterness in my voice was unmistakable. The resentment I had been holding in for so long was starting to bleed through, and I couldn't control it anymore. The floodgates were open, and I wasn't sure I could close them. "I didn't," he faltered, and I could sense the guilt in his voice. But it wasn't enough. "I didn't want to hurt you, David. But she came to me. She needed someone to talk to, someone who understood." I clenched my fists, the words stinging like acid. She needed someone to talk to? Was that how he justified it? "You're a coward," I said, each word coming out with a cold venom. "You don't get to hide behind excuses. You knew what you were doing. You knew exactly what you were taking from me." There was another long pause. I could feel him shifting on the other end, the weight of my words hitting him harder than I'd expected. "Look, I'm sorry," he muttered, though I could tell it wasn't the kind of apology I needed. "I never wanted to hurt you. I don't know what to say. She wanted it. I thought—" I felt a rush of heat flood my chest. The arrogance, the audacity of it all. He thought it was a mistake. He thought he could take something from me, from my marriage, without consequences? "Don't you dare say you thought it was okay," I snapped. "You knew exactly what you were doing, and now, because of you, everything's broken." I was quiet for a moment, my chest heaving with emotion. "You don't get to be sorry now. You don't get to act like you didn't ruin everything." The chill of the evening settled deeper, wrapping itself around me like an old, unwelcome coat. I couldn't shake the image of her face from my mind. Rachel, my wife. Her gentle features had been marred by the tension, the distance, the secrets she'd been keeping from me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smile, her laugh, and I wondered, had it all been a lie? Or had she truly once loved me before everything started to unravel? I need to talk to her. But how? I didn't want to be consumed by anger, not anymore. But it was hard not to be. She had betrayed me, not only physically but emotionally, by choosing him over me. And now, I was left picking up the pieces, trying to make sense of something that felt utterly senseless. I needed to see her face, to hear her voice. I needed answers. And I wasn't sure if they would heal me or destroy me. The next morning, as I moved through the motions of my daily routine, Everything felt off. The air was thick with unspoken words, and every step I took seemed to echo in my head. Rachel was still asleep when I left, curled up beneath the blankets in that same spot she'd slept in for years. Her breathing was steady, her body relaxed, but I knew it was only a mask. Beneath the calm exterior, something had shifted. We were no longer the same two people who had promised to love each other forever. I couldn't bear it anymore. I needed to confront her, to see where we stood. My thoughts were scattered as I drove to the office, my hands gripping the steering wheel with a force that left my knuckles white. The thought of her being with him, of her choosing him over me, left me nauseous. But what hurt more than the betrayal was the feeling of helplessness, of being blindsided by someone I knew. How could she do this? How could she give him a piece of her that was supposed to be mine? She's carrying our child, I reminded myself. She's the mother of my future. That thought grounded me for a moment, reminding me that there was still something important between us. But even as I thought it, I couldn't help but wonder, was that enough anymore? The office was unusually quiet when I arrived, and I took my time walking to my desk, letting the sound of my footsteps reverberate in the sterile, empty halls. When I sat down, I glanced at the phone on my desk, my mind drifting back to the call I had made last night. I'll talk to her after work, I decided. I'll make her tell me everything. But as the day dragged on, that certainty wavered. Would I have the strength to hear the truth? Would I be able to process it, or would it break me completely? By the time I returned home that evening, I was filled with a restless energy, unsure of how to approach her. Rachel was there, as I'd expected, sitting on the couch, her gaze flicking briefly toward the door as I entered. But there was a certain coldness in her eyes. She had always been warm, always welcoming when I came home, but now there was nothing but distance. She wasn't angry, but she wasn't trying to close the gap between us either. I took a deep breath and sat beside her, feeling the space between us more acutely than ever before. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. She avoided looking at me directly, her eyes focused on the television, though her mind seemed far away. I studied her face, trying to find any sign of guilt or remorse, but it was hard to tell. She looked so distant, like a stranger. Is this really her now? The silence stretched on until I couldn't stand it any longer. My voice came out low, almost shaky, but I couldn't keep it inside any longer. Rachel, I began, my tone careful. We need to talk. She shifted slightly, the smallest movement as if bracing herself. Her lips parted, but no words came. I could see her struggle, the same way I was. This wasn't a conversation either of us wanted to have. Not like this. What happened? I asked, my voice hoarse with a mix of disbelief and pain. Why, him? Why did you do this? Her gaze flickered to me, but she didn't answer immediately. Her mouth pressed into a tight line, and I could see the fight in her eyes, the unwillingness to fully face me, to admit everything she'd done. I didn't plan this, she whispered after a long pause. It wasn't supposed to be like this, David. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The words echoed in my head, a hollow justification. She wasn't even taking full responsibility. You don't get to say that, I said, my voice growing more intense. You don't get to make excuses for this. You chose him over me, Rachel. You chose him. Her eyes flickered with something, guilt, fear, regret, but it was fleeting, replaced quickly by defensiveness. I didn't mean to hurt you. I never wanted this to be how it turned out. I leaned forward, my elbows resting on my knees, my hands gripping the edge of the couch, the weight of everything pressing down on me, suffocating me. Then why didn't you stop? I sat there, the weight of her words settling like a heavy stone in the pit of my stomach. The silence between us felt suffocating, as though the air itself was thick with the bitterness of betrayal. I wanted to scream, to demand that she explain every detail of what had happened, every moment she had shared with him. But the words wouldn't come. They couldn't. Instead, I found myself staring at the floor, trying to piece together the fragments of a life I no longer recognized. The house around us, the soft ticking of the clock on the wall, the smell of dinner still lingering in the air, it all felt foreign now, like a scene from someone else's life. How did we get here? Rachel's voice broke through my thoughts, soft but strained, as though she was unsure whether to continue or retreat into the safety of silence. David, I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to destroy what we had. I met her eyes then, finally. She was crying, her cheeks flushed, her makeup smudged from the tears. But even as I saw her vulnerability, I couldn't feel sympathy. I just felt numb. You say that now, I whispered, my voice barely audible. But you did hurt me, Rachel. You made a choice. And every time I think about what you did, I feel like I'm drowning. I don't know who you are anymore. Her lips trembled, and for a moment, I thought she might say something that would make it all better, that she would apologize in the way I needed, deep, genuine, without any excuses. But that wasn't what happened. I'm sorry, she said, her voice cracking. I am so sorry, David, but I don't know how to fix this. I don't know what to do to make it right. How could she not know? How could she not understand the magnitude of what she'd done? I shook my head, the frustration building inside me like a storm I couldn't control. You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about being sorry. This isn't about trying to fix things with empty words. You destroyed everything we had. Everything. I could feel my pulse quickening, my hands trembling at my sides. I wanted to get up, to leave, to run far away from this house, from her, from the memories that were now tainted by the truth. But I stayed rooted to the spot, the tension in my body unbearable. I'm not asking for forgiveness, David, she said, her voice small. I'm just asking for a chance to prove that I can make it right, that we can rebuild what we lost. I looked at her, trying to read her eyes, searching for sincerity. But all I saw was desperation, the kind of desperation I had never seen in her before. She was willing to fight, but what was left to fight for? Could we really rebuild something that had been shattered into 1,000 pieces? I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat growing as the enormity of the situation settled over me. I felt like I was caught in some kind of twisted nightmare, one where the rules of love and trust had been ripped apart, leaving me in the dark, unsure of who I was supposed to be anymore. Is there even a way forward from this? I don't know if I can do that, I said, the words heavy in the air. I don't know if I can go back to who we were. I don't know if I can trust you again. Rachel reached out, her hand trembling, as she placed it on mine. I could feel the warmth of her touch, but it felt like a stranger's touch, alien and cold. I wanted to pull away, but something in me, something deep down, something fragile, kept me there. You don't have to forgive me right now, she said softly. But please, just think about it, please, David. For a moment, I couldn't respond. I couldn't give her an answer. My mind was spinning, every thought colliding with the next, pulling me in different directions. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to walk away and never look back. But I couldn't. Not completely. She's carrying my child, the thought resurfaced. But it didn't offer the comfort I thought it would. It only made everything feel even more complicated. The room seemed to close in on me as I fought against the storm of emotions swirling inside. I needed time. Time to think. Time to breathe. Time to decide what I was willing to do with this broken version of my life. I can't promise anything, Rachel, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos inside. But I need time. I need to figure out what I want, what I need. Her face fell, but she didn't argue. Instead, she nodded slowly, her expression one of resignation. She knew this wasn't something that could be fixed overnight. But maybe, just maybe, there was still a flicker of hope buried deep within her. A hope that we could start over, that we could rebuild. But I wasn't sure if that was something I wanted anymore. Would forgiveness be enough? Would it even matter? I don't know, I thought again, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on me. I stood up, the motion sharp like a sudden jolt that broke the quiet tension. I need to go for a walk,